The alien empire of Verithis stretched across dozens of star systems, bound together by fear, tradition, and the will of a single ruler. At its center sat the obsidian throne, carved from a stone older than most civilizations. Upon it ruled Queen Xyrith, an ancient being whose life had lasted longer than some stars. To most of the galaxy, she was not just a queen, she was a force of nature. Species rose and fell beneath her reign. Empires bowed. Fleets waited in silence for her commands. No one questioned her authority, and no one dared meet her eyes for long. The galaxy believed she was untouchable. Humans, in contrast, were barely noticed. They were young. Their technology was clever but unimpressive compared to the ancient races. Their lives were short, their bodies fragile, and their influence small. Most galactic councils spoke of humanity as a future concern, something to deal with later if they ever became important. That was why the human envoy's arrival at the Verithis court caused little excitement. Elias Rowan stood alone at the edge of the massive throne chamber. He wore a simple dark uniform, free of symbols or weapons. No guard stood beside him. No fleet waited in orbit to threaten or impress. He was, by every measure the galaxy valued, insignificant. The chamber itself was vast beyond human scale. Pillars like mountains rose into shadowed heights. Floating lights drifted slowly through the air, casting cold reflections on polished black stone. Alien nobles filled the tiers along the walls, creatures of metal, crystal, scale, and forms Elias could not fully understand. Their many eyes studied him with open dismissal. Some whispered, "That is the human? So small. Why did the queen allow this?" At the center, Queen Xyrith watched in silence. She was tall even while seated, her form wrapped in living armor that shifted like dark liquid. Her eyes glowed with a deep violet light, ancient and sharp. She had seen thousands kneel before her. She had crushed rebellions with a thought and erased leaders with a word. Yet the human did not kneel. Elias stood straight, hands relaxed at his sides. His heart beat fast, but his face remained calm. He had prepared for this moment for years, not with weapons or threats, but with understanding. Humanity had decided long ago that trying to outmatch ancient empires in power was pointless, so they chose something else. The queen's voice echoed through the chamber, smooth and heavy with authority. "Human," she said. "You stand before the ruler of Verithis. Speak your purpose." Every noble waited for fear, for trembling, for weakness. Elias met her gaze. "We come to ask for recognition," he said evenly. "Not mercy, not protection. Recognition." A ripple of quiet shock spread through the chamber. Queen Xyrith narrowed her eyes slightly. Mortals begged. Mortals flattered. Mortals offered tribute. This one asked as if speaking to an equal. "And why?" she asked. "Should an empire older than your species consider your request?" Elias took a slow breath. "Because ignoring us now will cost the galaxy later," he said. "And because humanity learns faster than it fears." Some nobles hissed. Others laughed softly. The queen did not. Instead, she leaned forward just slightly. "Bold words," she said. "Especially from a being who will be dust before my next century ends." Elias nodded once. "That is true," he replied. "We are mortal. Every human here today will die. That is exactly why we act the way we do." The chamber grew quieter. Queen Xyrith studied him, not as a ruler now, but as a hunter observing unfamiliar prey. "Explain," she said. "Immortality makes patience easy," Elias said. "Mortality makes urgency unavoidable. Humans don't plan for eternity. We plan for impact." The words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time in centuries, Queen Xyrith felt something unexpected stir in her mind. Not anger, not amusement, interest. She rose from the throne. The movement alone caused several nobles to bow deeply. Her full height was terrifying, her presence pressing down on the chamber like gravity. She descended the steps slowly, each step echoing. Elias did not move. She stopped directly in front of him. Up close, the difference between them was striking. She was ancient, powerful, almost divine. He was small, human, breathing, fragile. "You do not fear me," she said quietly. "I do," Elias answered honestly. "But fear doesn't decide what I say." That answer made her pause. Most who claimed fearlessness were lying. This one was not. "Your species intrigues me," she said. "Not because of strength, not because of numbers, but because you walked into this chamber knowing you could be erased." Elias nodded again. "Someone had to," he said. Silence stretched. Then, without warning, the queen stepped closer. Gasps echoed through the hall as she raised her arms and wrapped them around the human. It was not violent. It was not cruel. It was intimate. Her armor softened, shifting to allow contact. Elias froze, not in fear, but in surprise. The chamber erupted into stunned chaos. Voices rising in disbelief. Queen Xyreth lowered her head slightly, her voice soft but carrying through the hall. "You're mine, my mortal." The words struck like lightning. The nobles fell silent. Some stared in horror, others in confusion. Alliances shifted in a single heartbeat. Elias did not pull away. Slowly, carefully, he placed one hand against her armor, not in possession, but in acknowledgement. "If that means partnership," he said, "then humanity listens." The queen released him and turned back toward her throne, her expression unreadable. "Take the human to my inner court," she commanded. "This discussion is not finished." As guards moved to obey, the galaxy felt it, though none yet understood it. Something ancient had changed, and humanity had just been noticed. The inner court of Queen Xyreth was nothing like the grand throne chamber. It was smaller, quieter, and filled with soft light that came from no visible source. The walls were alive with slow-moving patterns, as if the room itself was thinking. This place was forbidden to almost everyone. Only the queen's closest advisors had ever entered it. Now, a human stood inside. Elias Rowan walked forward under the watchful eyes of the queen's guards. They were tall, silent beings clad in dark armor. Their weapons folded neatly against their bodies. They did not threaten him, but their presence was heavy, like a warning without words. Queen Xyreth moved ahead of him, her long steps calm and controlled. From behind, she looked distant again, every trace of emotion hidden. Yet Elias knew something important had happened out there in the throne chamber. The embrace had not been for show alone. It had been a decision. The doors closed behind them with a deep, final sound. Silence settled. "You may speak freely here," the queen said at last, turning to face him. "No ears listen except mine." Elias exhaled slowly. He had been holding his breath longer than he realized. "Then I'll be honest," he said. "What you did back there changed everything." "Yes," Queen Xyreth replied. "That was the point. Thanks for watching." She studied him carefully, her glowing eyes searching his face. Most beings tried to hide fear or desire when standing before her. Elias showed neither. He looked tired, but steady, determined, but not arrogant. "You are not offended," she noted. "No," Elias said. Surprised, yes, but not offended. "Why?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Because humans don't survive by reacting blindly," he said. "We survive by adapting. If the ruler of this empire chooses to bind our fates together, I need to understand why." A faint curve appeared at the corner of her lips. It was not quite a smile, but close. "Clever mortal," she said. "Most would be overwhelmed by the honor." "I don't see it as honor," Elias replied. "I see it as responsibility." That answer pleased her more than she expected. She turned away and gestured toward a floating platform near the center of the room. Images shimmered to life above it. Star maps, trade routes, fleet positions. Lines of light flickered and shifted, showing borders that trembled like unstable glass. "This," Queen Xyreth said, "is the truth of my empire." Elias stepped closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. "It's unstable," he said. "Yes," she admitted. "For the first time in thousands of years," she explained without drama. Ancient alliances had grown weak. Lesser nobles had grown ambitious. Rival empires watched closely, waiting for a sign of weakness. The Queen's long reign, once a symbol of stability, had become a target. "They believe I am stagnant," she said. "That immortality has made me slow. And they think the human proves that," Elias said. Yes, outside the inner court, the galaxy was already reacting. News of the Queen's embrace spread faster than ships could travel. To some, it was unthinkable. To others, it was opportunity. A human at the Queen's side meant unpredictability. In the lower halls of the palace, alien nobles gathered in quiet groups. Whispers turned sharp. "She has lost perspective. She plays with mortals. This is weakness." Messages were sent. Secret meetings were arranged. Fleets began to shift. Elias felt the weight of it even without hearing the details. "You didn't choose me," he said carefully. "You chose humanity." Queen Xyrath nodded. "You are not special because of who you are," she said. "You are special because of what you represent. And that makes me a target," Elias said. "Yes." He did not flinch. "That was always going to happen," he said. She watched him closely again. "You accept this easily." "We accept risk every day," Elias replied. The word love lingered in the air longer than either expected. For a moment, the Queen said nothing. She had ruled for so long that emotions had become distant things, carefully managed and rarely trusted. Yet this mortal spoke of connection as strength, not weakness. "You believe attachment makes you stronger," she said. "Yes," Elias answered. "Because it gives us something worth protecting." Before she could respond, a soft alert pulsed through the room. One of her advisors appeared as a projection, bowing low. "My queen," the advisor said. "The Triarch Coalition has issued a formal demand." Queen Xyrath's eyes hardened. "Speak it." "They demand the human be surrendered," the advisor said. "As proof that your judgment remains unchanged." Elias felt a quiet chill run through him. The Queen did not look at the advisor. She looked at Elias. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "If you give me up, you keep the peace. If you don't, they will test you. And humanity will be judged either way," Elias said. "That's already happening." The projection faded. Silence returned. Queen Xyrath turned back to the star map. One section pulsed red enemy territory growing closer. "They believe you are leverage," she said. Elias stepped forward. "Then let me remove that leverage," he said. She turned sharply. "Explain." "Humans are good at one thing the galaxy underestimates," he said. "We take responsibility before we are ready." He outlined a proposal. Not a threat. Not a demand. A commitment. Humanity would openly align with the Queen's empire, not as subjects, but as partners. Shared trade. Shared defense planning. Shared risk. "If they attack," Elias said, "they don't face just you. They face a species that learns fast and fights hardest when cornered." The Queen listened in silence. "You offer your people to my enemy's attention," she said. "Yes," Elias replied, "because hiding hasn't worked." For a long moment, she studied him. This was not desperation. It was resolve. Slowly, she stepped closer again. "You are aware," she said softly, "that many in my court would rather see you destroyed than elevated." "I know," Elias said. "That's why this has to be public." A spark flared in her eyes. "You would stand beside me," she said, "in full view of the galaxy." Yes, the decision settled between them, heavy and irreversible. "Then prepare yourself, Elias Rowan," Queen Xyrath said. "The next council will not be kind." Elias allowed himself a small, calm smile. "Humans rarely grow under kindness," he said. "Pressure is familiar." As he was escorted to his chambers, the Queen remained alone, staring at the star map. For the first time in centuries, she felt anticipation instead of certainty. And across the stars, fleets began to move. The next council session was nothing like the one before. The great chamber filled again. But this time the air was tense, sharp with expectation. Alien nobles stood closer together, whispering less and watching more. Armed guards lined the walls, their presence no longer ceremonial. Across the galaxy, observers tuned in through distant relays, eager to see what would happen next. At the center stood Queen Xyreth, calm as ever on her obsidian throne, and beside her stood Elias Rowan. He did not wear armor. He did not carry a weapon. He stood in the same simple uniform, hands relaxed, eyes forward. But now, the weight on his shoulders was far heavier. This was no longer just about recognition. It was about survival. The Triarch Coalition's representatives arrived together. 3 figures stepped into the chamber, each from a powerful species, each old, wealthy, and dangerous in their own way. Their arrival silenced the room. One of them spoke first, its voice cold and precise. "Queen Xyreth," it said, "we warned you, and yet the human remains at your side." Queen Xyreth did not respond immediately. She looked across the chamber, letting the silence grow uncomfortable. "He remains," she said finally, "because I choose it." A low murmur spread. The second Triarch stepped forward. "Then you choose instability. This mortal presence disrupts balance." Elias felt many eyes turn toward him, some filled with anger, others with fear. He did not look away. "Balance," Queen Xyreth replied, "is not the same as stagnation." The third Triarch's gaze fixed on Elias. "You risk war for a species that will burn out in a blink of time," it said. "Is that wise?" Before the Queen could answer, Elias spoke. "With respect," he said calmly, "you misunderstand us." Gasps echoed. Mortals rarely spoke out of turn in this chamber. Queen Xyreth did not stop him. "We don't burn out," Elias continued. "We burn bright. And we leave marks." The Triarch regarded him with open disbelief. "You speak as if that matters." "It does," Elias said, "because marks change the future." The first Triarch's tone sharpened. "Enough. The Coalition issues its final demand. Surrender the human envoy. End this mistake. Or we proceed with enforcement." Axis free formant. Axis formant. The word enforcement was carefully chosen. It meant fleets. It meant pressure. It meant war without saying the word. The chamber held its breath. Queen Xyreth rose slowly from her throne. "No," she said. The single word echoed like a shockwave. The Triarchs stiffened. "You choose conflict," one said. "No," the Queen replied. "I choose clarity." She stepped down from the throne and stood beside Elias, her presence towering but steady. "You believed my strength came from eternity," she said. "You believed I ruled because I outlasted all rivals. You were wrong." She placed a hand lightly on Elias's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but the message was clear. "I rule because I adapt." The Triarchs withdrew slightly, their confidence shaken but not broken. "Then you will face the consequences," one said. "The Coalition will test this." Adaptation. The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, fleets began to move openly. Within hours, warning signals echoed through the Varethus systems. Border outposts reported Coalition ships gathering in force. Trade lanes were disrupted. Old allies hesitated, unsure which side to support. Inside the palace, tension rose. Some nobles openly opposed the Queen now. Others quietly prepared escape routes. A few, watching Elias closely, began to reconsider their assumptions. Elias stood in a strategy chamber with Queen Xyreth and her advisors. Star maps glowed red and blue, showing possible invasion paths. "They outnumber us," one advisor said. "Their fleets are larger." "Yes," Elias agreed, "but they're slow." Several advisors turned to him. "They rely on overwhelming force," Elias continued. "Predictable formations, long command chains. Humans fight differently." Queen Xyreth watched him with focused interest. "Explain," she said. "We don't wait to be perfect," Elias said. "We move fast, learn faster, and adjust mid-fight." He proposed something risky. Human strike groups, small, mobile, and independent, would be embedded within the Queen's fleets. Not to lead, but to disrupt, to confuse enemy planning, to force mistakes. "They won't expect it," Elias said. "They don't think mortals can matter at this scale." The Queen considered the plan. "It exposes your people," she said. "Yes," Elias replied. "But it also gives us a voice." After a long moment, She nodded. Prepare them, she said. Human ships arrived within days, not massive armadas, but compact fleets. Their crews knew the odds. None turned back. As coalition forces crossed into contested space, the first clash came quickly. Human ships darted forward, not engaging directly, but interfering with communications, drawing fire, and vanishing before heavy weapons could lock on. Coalition commanders struggled to adjust. Confusion spread. At the same time, internal pressure built within the Queen's empire. One noble house attempted a quiet coup, believing the moment of chaos was perfect. They failed. Queen Xyrith crushed the attempt swiftly and publicly, reminding everyone that her authority had not weakened. In the midst of it all, Elias moved constantly between command centers, fleet briefings, and diplomatic channels. He barely slept. The weight of an entire species pressed on him. But he did not complain. Queen Xyrith watched him more closely than she watched the war. One evening, as reports slowed briefly, she spoke to him privately. "You do not hesitate," she said. "Even now, we hesitate," Elias replied. "We just don't stop." The war reached its peak near a critical system. Coalition forces pushed hard, confident they could still overwhelm the defense. Then the human element changed everything. Small human units coordinated strikes that disrupted supply lines. Coalition ships found themselves isolated, out of position, reacting instead of commanding. The Queen's fleets pressed the advantage. The Triarch coalition did not collapse, but they stalled. For the first time in centuries, they were forced to retreat and reassess. When the news reached the galaxy, shock followed. Humanity had not dominated the battlefield. It had reshaped it. Back in the capital, the mood shifted. Nobles who had doubted now bowed deeper. Allies returned cautiously. Enemies grew quiet. Elias stood once more beside Queen Xyrith as victory reports came in, not final, but meaningful. "They will return," she said. "Yes," Elias agreed. "But now they'll plan differently." "And so will we," she replied. She turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "You have proven something today," she said. "That humans are useful?" Elias asked. "No," she corrected. "That humans belong." The war was not over, but the galaxy would never see humanity the same way again, and neither would the Queen. Across dozens of star systems, fleets stopped moving and began watching. Old powers waited to see if the pause meant peace, or only a longer war. Trade slowed. Diplomats spoke carefully. Everyone understood one thing now: humanity was no longer invisible. Inside the capital of Varithis, Queen Xyrith stood alone before the great star window of her inner court. The stars beyond looked the same as they always had, but she knew the balance among them had shifted. Elias Rowan entered quietly. He looked exhausted. Dark circles rested under his eyes, and his movements were slower than before. Weeks of pressure, fear, and responsibility had taken their toll. Yet his posture remained steady. "You should be resting," the Queen said without turning. "So should you," Elias replied. That earned a soft breath of amusement from her. "The coalition has requested talks," she said. "Not demands. Talks." Elias let out a long breath he did not realize he had been holding. "That's good," he said. "It means they finally understand." "They understand that brute force will cost too much," she replied. "And that humans complicate every calculation." She turned to face him. "You knew this would happen." "Yes," Elias said, "but knowing doesn't make it lighter." The talks were held on neutral ground, in a system far from any capital. Representatives from dozens of species attended. Some came in fear. Others came in curiosity. All came because they could no longer afford to ignore what had happened. Elias stood beside Queen Xyrith once more, but this time, no one questioned his place. The Triarch coalition leaders appeared again, but their posture had changed. Where once there was certainty, now there was caution. "You have proven your point," one of them said. "Humanity is disruptive." Elias allowed himself a small, tired smile. "We prefer the word adaptable," he said. The talks were long and difficult. No one trusted easily. Old grudges surfaced. Fears were spoken aloud. At several points, the discussions nearly collapsed. But something had changed in the room. Humans listened. They did not interrupt. They did not threaten. They acknowledged concerns and answered honestly. They admitted weaknesses without shame and spoke of learning rather than dominance. Slowly, resistance softened. Queen Xyreth watched closely. She had ruled through authority for centuries. Now she saw influence built through understanding. At last, an agreement formed. The Triarch Coalition would recognize humanity as a full galactic partner. Not a subject. Not a curiosity. A participant. In return, humanity would continue joint defense cooperation and open trade across shared systems. It was not perfect, no agreement ever was, but it was real. When the final words were spoken, the galaxy shifted again, this time not through fear, but acceptance. Back on Varethis, the Empire adjusted to its new reality. Human diplomats moved through ancient halls once closed to mortals. Human engineers worked alongside alien masters, improving systems that had not changed in ages. Cultural exchanges began awkward at first, then easier. Some nobles resisted. A few left, most adapted. Because the queen had. One evening, long after the celebrations faded, Queen Xyreth stood once more in the great throne chamber. It was empty now, quiet in a way it rarely had been. Elias stood before her, alone. "You have completed your mission," she said. "Humanity has recognition, security, a future." "Yes," Elias said, "but I don't think my work is finished." She studied him. "You plan to stay." "For a while," he said. "If you'll have me." She stepped down from the throne, her movements slower, more thoughtful than before. "You changed my empire," she said, "and you did not demand anything in return." "We asked for a chance," Elias replied. "You gave it." She stopped in front of him, close enough now that the vast difference between them felt smaller than it once had. "When I first wrapped my arms around you," she said quietly, "the galaxy thought I was claiming a possession." Elias nodded. "I know. But that was never my intention," she continued. "I was making a statement." "And what statement was that?" he asked. She met his eyes, ancient and clear. "That power does not have to stand alone," she said. "And eternity does not always see what a moment can change." She lifted one hand, not commanding, not possessive, but open. "You are not mine because you are mortal," she said. "You are mine because you chose to stand." Elias placed his hand in hers. "And you are not above us," he said. "You stood with us." Outside the chamber, the stars continued their endless motion. Civilizations would rise and fall. Even empires like hers would one day fade, but something would remain. Stories. Across the galaxy, the story spread. Of the ancient queen who did not crush the young species. Of the human who did not kneel. Of a moment when power chose partnership. Humanity did not conquer the stars. It earned its place among them. And for the first time in her long life, Queen Xyreth felt something she had never expected to feel again. Hope. Not for eternity, but for what could be built together, one moment at a time,